Let's open the HDR Light Studio connection panel. We'll go to Plugins, HDR Light Studio C4D connection. Let's dock this into the interface. Okay, the first thing is to make sure that the correct renderer is selected. This project we are using Corona. Now we will use the Add Pre-Built Hook button. Let's press it. This has created a HDR Light Studio.Corona object that contains the environment set up for the chosen renderer. In this case, a Corona sky has automatically been created. HDR Light Studio will control the image on this Corona sky. We're ready. Let's press Start. By default, your interface will probably look something like this. This particular render view here, the new render view in Tungsten 2, supports a selection of renderers. At the moment, Corona is not one of them, and this view cannot be used. Therefore, let's go to Window, Layout, Load, Default, Standalone. This provides the tools and views in HDR Light Studio that are relevant. At this point, we have a two display setup. I'm going to place HDR Light Studio on one and Cinema 4D on the other. Okay, we've got Cinema 4D on this display and HDR Light Studio on this one. The first thing we're going to do is press the play button in HDR Light Studio's render view. Then press Import. By default, this will export the Cinema 4D scene into HDR Light Studio's render view via a temporary Alembic file. Okay, so the scene is now rendered by this view interactively. If we were to make a change in the brightness of the light, this will update straight away. Let's make our first light. In the presets panel, let's find a light and drag and drop this onto the model. A light is added to the HDRI map that reflects in the location where the light was dropped. This is because the light paint mode for the view is set to reflection by default. To move the light, because the light paint tool is also active by default, if we click in the view, it will reposition the light. We can click and drag on the model to move the light. To see the result of this lighting inside of Cinema 4D, let's start interactive rendering. Now, as we make a change to the lighting in HDR Light Studio, the lighting is updated in Cinema 4D in Corona. I'm going to duplicate this light and click on the model to reposition it. You can see the lighting updates straight away inside Cinema 4D in Corona. So far, all the lighting is coming from a HDRI map. With a single setting in HDR Light Studio, Area Light, the light is removed from the map that is lighting the render view in HDR Light Studio and inside of Cinema 4D. The light has actually been created as a 3D area light. You can see it listed here, and if we look at its settings, you can see that a texture is being used that is coming from HDR Light Studio for this area light. So all the lighting that is done in HDR Light Studio is kept in sync inside of Cinema 4D. Area lights are controlled with a smart dolly for the distance. And they're positioned in just the same way using light paint. If you decide that you don't want the light as an area light and you want to return it to the HDRI map, uncheck this checkbox. The light is then returned to the HDRI map. Okay, So let's say that we're happy with the lighting created in HDR Light Studio. Press the HDR button. We're now going to render a high quality HDRI map on disk, and if we had area lights, they would be rendered also as high quality textures. We'll pick the resolution for the HDRI map. You can pick the resolution for the area light, and let's browse and give the file a name. Cinema 4D Corona. And press render. A high quality HDRI map is now generated, and Cinema 4D is updated to use this file on disk. If we look in Cinema 4D and we look at the Corona sky, we can see that this is the texture now being used by the environment. This scene is now ready to render using the normal lighting inside of Cinema 4D. We can now stop the connection with HDR Light Studio. If you wanted to make changes to this lighting, we can start HDR Light Studio again. The HDR Light Studio project data is embedded inside the Cinema 4D scene. So when HDR Light Studio starts, it automatically loads the lighting design where we left it. We can now modify the design. Press play to import your model again. We can now light paint in this view. If we want to finalize the lighting again, press the HDR button, choose a file name, and press render. Stop HDR Light Studio, and we can see that Cinema 4D is using the new file on disk for the lighting. And your scene is now again ready to render in Cinema 4D and Corona with the lighting created in HDR Light Studio. Okay, so thank you for watching the workflow between Cinema 4D and HDR Light Studio.